basically the stories are, my dad had one of the first four-wheel drives in the area because he was an amputee, lost his leg when he was about 20, and he bought one of the first Jeeps, the first four-wheel drives. And his freedom was getting up in the woods on weekends. He's had one day off a week on Sunday. He was a meat cutter here in town, and we would just go as far up in the Tules as we could go. And he would explore places that he got into places most people would walk into, but he would get his four-wheel drive up there. And our first experience with anything due to caribou was way up Priest Lake, maybe up Two Mouth Creek when I was about 10 or 11 years old. Up there driving around, we saw some tracks that we could not identify. And there were no elk in the area at the time, and they knew elk tracks, and there were no moose in the area, but we knew moose tracks, but there was a weird track. It could have only been a caribou track, so that was kind of interesting. Dad told me a story. He used to have a meat market downtown here, just a couple blocks on First Avenue. That was before that, when he worked at the Pastime Cafe or Pastime gambling hall as a card dealer. And they were working one day, I think it was probably in the 30s, and this old Norwegian came in with his thick Norwegian accent, and he's like, "You got to come out and see this big white-tailed buck I got." And they all went outside and looked in the back of his truck, and there was a caribou laying there. And they're all just like, "Get out of here with that thing." So that was the other experience with the caribou. The guy peeled out, he'd killed a caribou and thought it was a white-tailed buck. The third experience was I got an elk or a deer one time, and I was going to use the grinder at one of our local packing places, a cooler, Jack's Lockers it was called. And they would let me borrow their grinder to do my grinding because I had experience. I knew because I used to work at my dad's meat market. So they let me use their grinder. And I went in one day to grind this up, and they said, "Hey, where do you want to see this?" And I went back in their cooler, and there was a caribou laying there, blood, guts, feathers, and all. I mean, this whole caribou. Like, what is this? So the story was, a guy and his friend were hunting deer out west of town here at Renco Loop, in the Renco area, which is right by the Pondray River, basically, not up in the top of the Selkirks and high country or nothing like that. The guy was making a drive, and he chased a bunch of does by this guy in fairly thick brush, and the does went by, and then following him was this nice buck and running through the brush, and he shot it, and he walked up to it, and it was not a white-tailed buck, it was a cow caribou. And she had antlers very similar to what a little non-typical white-tailed buck might have. And he shot it. But he turned himself in, and the Fish and Game came and confiscated it, got the story, and basically ended up not citing him for it because the story was feasible. That's the one caribou I have seen. It's not been live. And they butchered it and gave the food to the food bank or whatever they did with that, but the guy did not get cited. But the caribou was not where you would expect it to be. It did look a lot like a white-tailed buck, especially running through brush or something like that, and the guy turned himself in, so that was the story behind that. Another thing that I wanted to mention was I did not understand all the money that has been spent trying to reintroduce caribou and all the effort that they went to do that, and then how it made sense to bring wolves into the area and try to bring back wolves and reestablish caribou at the same time made no sense to me whatsoever. And up in just north of here, up in the Selkirks in Canada, they're trying desperately to thin out the wolf population because they're preying on caribou so bad, and the caribou population up there is in trouble. So that's my story. I've never seen. And then there's a caribou painted on the side of this building over here. And I bothered them when they painted that. I said they painted it facing the wrong direction because it's going south, and most of the caribou, when they release them, they go north. So I got to pick on people a little bit there. That's my stories.